Go out the door when you'd rather sit. Sit at your computer when you'd rather go out the door.
Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Mark Townsend, producer. On today's episode, Dan Huger speaks with Marvin Olasky, executive editor for News and Global at Christianity Today and founder and chairman of Zenger House. They discuss many of the news stories that won the 2025 Zenger Prizes. What is the state of journalism today? How does honoring excellence in journalism encourage better journalism? What makes for a good story, ethically and technically? And how can those who love reading great journalism become great journalists themselves? You can find additional resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as find previous episodes of Acton Line at acton.org/actonline. And if you like this program, you can help us reach even more listeners by sharing it with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We welcome your comments as well. Acton Line is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Welcome. My name is Dan Huger, librarian and research associate at the Acton Institute. Today I'm joined by Marvin Olasky, executive editor for News and Global at Christianity Today, and the founder and chairman of Zenger House. He is also an affiliate scholar here at the Acton Institute. Marvin is an accomplished editor and reporter, the author of 25 books and the co-author or editor of 23 more, along with more than 5,000 magazine and newspaper articles in publications including the Wall Street Journal and Christianity Today. Also, Religion and Liberty, Acton's magazine. Among his books are Prodigal Press, Compassionate Conservatism, The Tragedy of American Compassion, The Story of Abortion in America, Lament for a Father, and Reforming Journalism. Today, we will be discussing the state of journalism and the work of his foundation, Zenger House, a Christian foundation that exists to help journalistic startups and honor excellence in journalism. The foundation awards annual prizes to encourage outstanding writers in their craft and to offer examples of biblically informed original reporting for others to emulate and enjoy. The 2025 Zenger Prize winners have been announced today, which is a Thursday, which is a little different for Acton Line, but this is why we are a day late. We wanted to coordinate this. Those have been announced today, and we'll be discussing a few, and we'll have links to each and every one in our show notes. They'll also be available at a link at Zenger House, where if you are not a subscriber to many of these fine publications, they will be available for you to view without a paywall. Marvin, welcome to Acton Line, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the listing of those numbers and publications. Wow, time goes fast when you're having fun.
It does, absolutely. And time has been going fast in journalism kind of forever. I mean, it's a craft of deadlines. It's a craft of dailies. Sometimes, multiple daily editions in years past. And now with a sort of constant stream of publications, what is, in your estimation, sort of the state of journalism today? There's a lot of challenges out there in the world of news and opinion.
Well, there are a lot of challenges. There certainly are. A long time ago, I worked on the Boston Globe, grew up in Boston, and the Globe, both growing up as I read it, walking home from school and trying to fold the news pages and try to avoid bumping into mailboxes and stuff like that. It was a good newspaper in lots of ways, and I enjoyed working on it. There was a certain almost suffocating liberalism, but left of center, not extremely so, moderately so, but certainly there. And that was the viewpoint. There was a conservative newspaper, the Boston Herald. It didn't have much of a reach. So the Globe was really dominant. And my sense was, wow, it'd be nice to have competition, a diversity of voices. I wrote a book back in 1988 called Prodigal Press that called for that. Well, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
There certainly is a lot of variety. There's also a lot of craziness and a lot of caring more about slinging opinions than actually going out and doing ground level reporting. So a lot of improvements in many ways, some things going backwards. And as far as learning what the facts are and what's actually going on, in some ways it's much more difficult than it was then. Then you had to read a liberal newspaper like the Boston Globe with a certain filter, but you kind of knew what to do and what to look for. And now it's all over the place, and everyone has his or her own selection of facts. And that's a problem. It's a blessing, but it's also a curse.
Yeah, I mean, there might be an ideological slant. Journalism, certainly before the 20th century, was oftentimes an ideologically fueled business where you had political parties that would explicitly back certain papers. In the 20th century, there was a sort of professionalization in a lot of ways and a lot of good innovation. But yeah, you still get those ideological slants. I remember at the tender age of 9 was when I first learned about media bias. When I was taken by my father to a rally for then presidential candidate George H.W. Bush, was then president. And the big line at the rally was annoy the media and vote for me, because, and this is a time, people look back on the early 90s as a less polarized time, and maybe it was, but even then, this was sort of like a tagline. Since those days, though, there's also been a crisis in the business model of journalism. There's been a lot of papers that have struggled, some that have closed, many commendable outlets who do excellent work lay off, it seems like, reporters on sort of like a monthly basis. I hear about this sort of thing. That's a newer challenge to journalism. And what do you make of those sort of challenges that are facing news outlets today?
Well, the old challenges for local newspapers was staying clear of control by advertisers, because newspapers were heavily dependent on that for finances. They actually often lost money in the actual subscription price, but they were selling consumers to the advertisers essentially and making money that way. And the threat was always, you're going to shade the truth, you're going to do things just to keep the advertisers happy. That's pretty much gone. Donors and funders are very big now in national publications. And there's the same kind of threat with donors determining what you'll print and what you won't print. Local newspapers have their own problem, that a lot of them have gone out of business. A lot of them are merely shells and shadows of what they once were. And as a result, there's a real dearth of local journalism, and people are familiar with who is president of the United States and have opinions on that, but they often don't know who's on the mayor or the city council, and often no one's covering City Hall. And so you have a lot of stuff that goes on, some good stuff, but also a lot of corruption and a lot of finagling, and that just doesn't get covered at all. So those are the problems. They're a different set of problems than were in the past. The plus side is that people sometimes talk about the media as if it were singular, but it's a plural noun, and it really is plural these days.
Yeah.
You have media on the left, you have media on the right. That's different than it was. It's an improvement in many ways, but it is a real problem when people exist only within a very circumcised set of part of information, and they just hear one thing, and often that thing is propagandistic rather than journalistic.
Yeah, you've got real challenges there. I think about growing up, the Grand Rapids Press was a much thicker paper than it was, and it was published 7 days a week. And now that is not the case. Even the major Detroit papers here in Michigan, the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News, Detroit News being the more right-wing paper, the Detroit Free Press being the more left-wing paper, they, in fact, publish on alternating days so as to not cannibalize each other's circulation, which brings some political balance in a sense. If you want Detroit News most of the week, you have to just subscribe to both. But it does not speak well for the model, the business model. Now you founded Zenger House to sort of deal with some of these challenges, and it has a sort of twofold mission. Could you Could you tell us a little bit about that helping new startups on the one hand, and then recognizing journalistic excellence on the other?
Sure. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and give out an average of 10 prizes a year. Some of them go to well-known journalists. This year, for example, Caitlin Dickerson of The Atlantic, Jason DeParle of The New York Times. They've been around for a while. They're really good writers and good reporters. But others go to people who are hardly known at all. And sometimes they don't know whether they're going to have a paycheck next week. So this is enormously gratifying for me, and I hope gratifying for the award winners. They get a little bit of money, $1,000, but they get recognition, and someone's paying attention. They get honor for that. It's not quite the Pulitzer Prizes. Maybe someday it will be. Not that, but nevertheless, someone's paying attention. Someone's watching. Someone reveres and esteems what they do. And that's something a lot of reporters, unless they do become famous, don't get much of anymore. So we have on the Zenger House website each year a short video. This year it's 13 minutes long. We interview all the winners, and they just talk a little bit, answering basically the same questions you're asking. What's the state of journalism? What's their morale at this point? And some of them, and we usually edit this out. I mean, they say nice things about the Zenger Prizes and how pleased they are with it. But that's nice for me to hear.
Yeah.
That it actually does make a difference. And that's something, well, people can see for themselves. That's the thing on the Zenger website. People can read all the articles, not just this year's winners, but the winners from the previous 3 years, and just see some really good journalism. There's a joke I used to tell, and I don't think it's really accurate anymore. Maybe it wasn't accurate then, but it was kind of fun. I would make fun of the New York Times and the Atlantic. Had an imaginary dialogue. There's an Atlantic reporter who doubts the religious knowledge of his New York Times counterpart. And he says, well, I bet you $20 you can't say the Lord's Prayer. And the Times reporter says, you're on. And then he bows his head and he mumbles, now I lay me down to sleep. The Atlantic reporter pulls out his wallet and hands over the $20 saying, hey, that's impressive. I didn't think you knew it.
That's a great one.
So, yeah, and that was then. It may occasionally be so now, but actually the religion reporters in those publications are pretty good. And I have to say, the Zenger House judges, we have 5 judges. We look for local journalism. We look for smaller publications. We have biases in that way. But hey, this year of the 12 awards, 2 of them go to the New York Times, 2 of them to the Atlantic. They're really good reporters. They have a lot of good reporters, and some of them are really biased, some of them aren't. But even the ones who are biased, they actually go out. They don't just sit in their offices and suck their thumbs, for the most part.
Yeah.
They actually go out and report. And that's really important. We emphasize ground level journalism. I used to, on the magazine I was editing, I told reporters, and I say to reporters now in Christianity Today that I'm involved in editing the same thing. We want street level, not suite level. And a lot of journalism these days is suite level. It is a lot easier and cheaper to sling opinions rather than go out and report. And good journalists, whether on the New York Times or the Atlantic, or I'm looking at one newspaper the other day, the Flatwater Free Press in Nebraska. Yeah. The thing that distinguishes a lot of good reporting from just this opinion slinging is actually going out and listening and paying attention, and not just in a very subjective way, giving your own opinions and thinking people should just settle for that.
So you mentioned that these prizes, they're a real morale booster to these people who are doing that street level work that oftentimes doesn't get recognized. Are there any other ways that these sort of awards work to sort of professionally advance people doing this good work? I think, we run an academic journal here, the Journal of Markets and Morality. And when you're published as an academic in one of these index journals, that opens up professional doors for you. That's something that hiring committees, when they're looking to hire professors, they look at. Is there a similar sort of career track in journalism where these awards, not only are they personally gratifying to receive, but like they might open up some professional doors for some folks that are doing some good work and might make a higher profile positions available to them?
I hope so, but it would probably be an exaggeration to say so right now.
Yeah.
We're in our fourth year. We're getting increasing recognition, but no, Pulitzer Prizes definitely open doors. Zenger Prizes, maybe in some places, but yeah, we're still building our reputation, and it's gratifying also to start this, and now, yeah, more people are paying attention. So, yeah, I can't claim that at this point, but I would hope at some point this really will be a something that people pay attention to on resumes.
So now, when we talk about you're building a distinct product in an award. We have Pulitzer Prizes, which do go to many excellent journalists. Zenger House has a slightly different mission, though, and it's got slightly different criteria for the sort of excellent reporting that it's looking for. It is looking for excellent reporting, but there are some other metrics that you look at, and one of those you mentioned is you try to look at these smaller outlets and give recognition there. That's part of your approach and your committee's approach. What else is distinct that the Zenger Prizes are looking at that maybe the folks at the Pulitzers aren't looking at and are overlooking?
Well, we look for stories that are not inconsistent with a biblical ethic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm using not inconsistent very advisedly.
Yeah.
For the most part, consistent. And I would say, let me just back up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say consistent with the biblical ethic in terms of valuing life of all kinds, valuing people from all over the world and people from different cultures, valuing hospitality to strangers, valuing caring about the uns, often the unemployed, the unschooled, often through no fault of their own, the undocumented. We want people to be legal, but I appreciate when people go through the Darien Gap, 70 miles of jungle in Panama, getting by jaguars and vipers. And I'm thinking about this because Caitlin Dickerson wrote a remarkable piece called 70 Miles in Hell. That's one of our award winners this year. She walked through the jungle, the Darien Gap jungle in Panama, and thousands of people have done that, desperate to make it to the United States. And she writes very movingly of going across a raging river, across the with a rope across the sheer face of a big rock, and seeing parents with their babies strapped to their chests getting across. So that's we have a bias and sense of action and adventure and ideas that are consistent with a biblical ethic. Yeah. Of hard work, courage, caring about other people, loving others rather than trying to just domineer them, etc. Now, in a sense, our bias is towards people who are Christians, but most of the awards, I think, go to people who aren't, because we're looking for good writing. I say consistent with a biblical ethic in that we do a little bit of checking into the background. And let's say that a writer, we don't know whether the writers are, in their own attitudes, pro-choice or pro-life or something like that. But if there's a writer who is really ardently pro-abortion and is proselytizing for that, then we would say that's not consistent with the biblical ethic. So that's important to us. That doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen. So that's the sense in which, I mean, we give awards to people of different religions or no religion. We're really looking at the piece of writing and seeing if it really sings mightily about the wonder of this world that God has made, about the importance of loving others rather than hating others, the importance of rising above tribalism. So those are some of the things we're looking for, but we're not doing a religion test. We're doing a writing test and just seeing if there's stuff that is very clearly inconsistent with a biblical ethic. That's our bias. We do have a bias in favor of smaller publications, but much of the time it's going to larger publications because we look at the articles and we look at the writing and yeah, is there actually going out and pounding the pavement to get human interest and specific detail rather than just slinging opinions?
So, like a great example of this is one of the other award winners was the midwives who stopped murdering girls and started saving them. This was published
Right.
in the BBC, which talks about midwives in primarily rural India, and these women are not primarily Christians, as India as a nation is an overwhelmingly Hindu nation with a very, very sizable Muslim minority and a very, very sizable Christian minority living there. But that gives you an idea of that ethic that is consistent with a sort of biblical ethic. But the protagonists of that story are by and large not Christians doing, they're not Christians, but they're still doing works of mercy.
Yes, and if you look at Indian demographics, there's a big gap. There has been a big gap. I don't know the latest figures between the number of baby boys and the number of baby girls.
Yes.
A lot of girls are aborted, and some of them even there's some infanticide that has gone on. So this is a story about a social worker who thought this was wrong. There were a number of social workers who thought this was wrong, and they rescued and arranged adoptions for baby girls instead of killing them. And the really moving piece of reporting is one of the saved girls named Monica. Decades later, met the midwife who helped to rescue her. So, yeah, it's a moving story. So it's a story that describes a real social problem, but does so with human interest and personal detail. And actually, one particular baby girl, now well grown, who was alive because of the midwife who thought this was wrong. So yeah, these stories are telling stories of human beings in a particular place, but they're also universal stories, and that I think is the secret of getting readers all over the world.
So one of the things we've talked about is you love to see this focus on the dignity of the human person in the reporting. This is one of the things you look for. One of the things you look for is reporters that really get in at street level or jungle level, in the case of Panama, and really get in there, and that they focus on people is another. Are there any other sort of those are all very important things? Are there any things that at a writing technical level you look at for excellent reporting in terms of style, usage, that sort of thing, that really puts something in that award-winning class?
Well, at a technical level, real basic stuff. For the most part, short sentences rather than long and lugubrious sentences. Often nouns and verbs rather than adjectives and adverbs. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with them, but strong nouns, strong verbs. Avoiding passive constructions. We like active stuff. I particularly have a certain dislike for semicolons. I think Kurt Vonnegut called them hermaphrodites. And I like to do semicolonoscopies or even semicolonectomies on them, removing them. So, basic things like that of good writing. Absolutely. And structure. I tend to tell reporters, especially in these days with people jumping around on the internet, every word has to sell the next word. Every sentence has to sell the next sentence. Every paragraph has to sell the next paragraph. So a good structure, as people who are journalists know some of these expressions, a nut graph, basically early in the story, basically saying what's the essence of the story, a strong lead, that's the most important sentence in a story, and then what journalists call a kicker, a strong kicker, which is the last sentence in the story, leaving a lasting impression. So, yeah, basic structural things like that, basic writing things like that, and a lot of human interest. Just one other writing tip for those who are interested, tend to tell beginning reporters or even some older reporters about PAMO, protagonist, antagonist, mission, obstacles. That's the basic of the story. And you can talk about it in literature, the hero's journey. There was a great detective novelist, sort of hard-boiled detective stories in the early middle part of the 20th century named Raymond Chandler, who used to say, "Down these mean streets a man must go." And same thing goes for women, but basically, down these mean streets, there's a challenge, there are obstacles, and the hero has to find a way to overcome those obstacles. That's what makes for good storytelling. The difference between nonfiction, journalistic nonfiction, and fiction is important. Journalists have to tell what's true. They can't make up things. But a lot of the techniques can be very similar. The techniques of narrative fiction journalists can use to try to get people interested in reading the story and following along a particular hero and seeing whether the person survives or not. So yeah, basic good writing, and we can teach it. Some people have better instincts than others, but it is teachable, and people can learn how to do that. As opposed to, it's very different. I don't know. Some of the people listening may have been in school where they taught 5-paragraph essays.
Yep.
And the first paragraph is supposed to be an introduction. The last paragraph is supposed to be a summary. Journalistically, basically, often get rid of the first paragraph, get rid of the last paragraph, get right to it. After a short, punchy lead, get right to it. So basics like that. Tell the story. Don't tell people what you're going to tell them. And at the end, summarize. Instead, have a kicker, something evocative, something moving. But it's not a summary of the whole story. It's something that can just leave people thinking.
So I was thinking, not too long ago, I was listening to a lecture by Lane Green, who's the head style editor at The Economist magazine, and he rewrites The Economist style guide, which is called Writing with Style, which is an excellent guide. And he gives a lot of those. In fact, when you started talking about colons and semicolons, he is of the exact same opinion, which is to excise them as much as possible. But one of the things that he says in that book is that people like and agree with things that they understand easily. And he also talks about in this lecture that the sort of concrete writing, the sort of writing that eschews abstraction and these sort of shaggy, baggy sentences, he made the case that actually makes for more truthful writing, that there is something that you're able to obfuscate and mislead less if you're forced to be clear. You could still lie, but it becomes a bold-faced lie and becomes less seductive and more transparent. How much do you think, you're somebody who's written a lot and you've read a lot of journalistic pieces. How much of the value of what reporters do you think comes from that format? Is that there's a sense in which they're writing these stories that are incredible stories. People write incredible stories in books. People write incredible stories less often, but sometimes in academic articles. People write incredible stories in plays, in epic poems, but there's something distinctive about journalism. And I think in the way every journalist I know, like they're drawn to it for this truth telling in some case. What do you think? What do you think is there a secret sauce in the form itself when it's done well?
Yeah, good question, and I like that Britishism that you quoted. It sounds at least London, shaggy baggy.
Yes.
Sorry, but yeah, avoid the shaggy baggy. And there may be a philosophical point here. I much as I, I think I could say I enjoyed Plato. I liked Aristotle better.
Yeah.
Reporting is often more Aristotelian than Platonic. We talk about specific detail rather than abstractions, or talk about street level rather than flying at 30,000 feet. Uh, Often street level, at least a helicopter rather than a jet just going quickly by things. So, yeah, actually having to look and see and listen. Uh, I want reporters to convey to readers not just what it looked like, but which we often tend to use our sight more than anything else. But what did it what did you hear? What did it smell like? What did it feel like? Yeah, that I think brings you back to certain fundamental realities that are otherwise easy to obfuscate. And actually, if I can take a moment to
Yeah.
wax historical, the okay, we are podcasting this, I believe, on April 9th, and this is the day we're awarding Zenger Prizes. And 10 days from now, uh, the April 19th, 2025 is the 250th anniversary of the shot heard round the world,
Hmm.
the beginning of the American Revolution in April 19th, 1775. So 250 years, and um, the aspect of truth telling was fundamental in the American Revolution in this sense. There was a tendency to, of course, pretend that King George III wasn't just going crazy, but was very wonderful and thoughtful, the kingly father whom everyone could respect. And you saw colonists like Samuel Adams telling the truth, saying this guy is politically nuts, and I don't know if they understood what was going on, but was going to become even more so. And that's important in American history. It's important in journalism because that was 40 years after. 1775 is 40 years after a different shot that became the shot heard around the world, and it all involved truth telling. Um, British law up until then, and it remained then on the books, but in the colonies at least, it wasn't followed. British law was the greater the truth, the greater the libel.
Hmm.
Namely, the job of the newspaper editor was to do public relations for the king or the royal governor. You wanted to make the king look good. Later on, you wanted to make George III look good. That was the job. And if you actually told the truth and thus hurt the reputation, you were acting unethically and you were actually breaking the law at that point. The greater the truth, the greater the libel. In 1735, John Peter Zenger said in his newspaper that the royal governor, William Cosby, was a thief, and he had the evidence to prove that. Uh, Zenger was thrown into prison, as well he should be under British law at the time, because he was hurting the reputation.
Yep.
And British law, the greater the truth, the greater the libel. If Zenger had said that Governor Cosby was a Martian, then people then as now would be less likely to believe him. And thus, saying he's a Martian, if you thought Martians were not nice people, nevertheless saying that Governor Cosby was a Martian, would not hurt his reputation as much as if you said Governor Cosby is a thief, stealing cattle, stealing land, taking bribes, because people would probably not believe that he was a Martian. People would believe that he was taking bribes. So you were in bigger legal trouble if you told the truth than if you lied. That was British law at the time. Zenger went to prison. There was a lawyer from Philadelphia named Andrew Hamilton who went before the jury in New York City and said, you should let Zenger go. He should get out of prison because he told the truth. And Hamilton's argument was basically, look at the Bible. Look at, for example, the prophet Elijah, who told the truth about King Ahab. Zenger is a modern day Elijah. He's telling the truth about William Cosby, Governor Cosby. Therefore, he's doing what the Bible says is right. Zenger's doing what is right. You should free him. And the jury courageously said Zenger is not guilty, which was wrong according to British law at the time.
Yeah.
So it's probably the first runaway jury in American history, running away from the law and saying, regardless of what the law says, there is as William Seward later said, there's a higher law.
Hmm.
And it's what we learned from the Bible. And thus Zenger is going to go free. And because of the political situation in New York City at the time, Cosby couldn't do anything about it. He would have had a revolt in his hands. So Zenger did go free. And he went back to running his newspaper. And that led to the American Revolution 40 years later, because starting in 1765 with the Stamp Act, uh, newspaper editors and columnists like Samuel Adams really led the way and said, we got to tell the truth about what the British are doing. They are being oppressive. They are laying taxes on us, even though they should not. There should be no taxation without representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really the Zenger trial and going free in 1735 and the liberation then of newspapers that really was the shot heard around the world that eventually led to the military fighting. So anyway, that's why we call it Zenger House, after John Peter Zenger, who was a Christian.
Yeah.
And got out of jail because the jury wanted to go by the Bible rather than by the saggy and baggy British law of the time.
That's great. And a great, I mean, jury nullification, when it's from a natural law perspective is something that I think any liberty-loving individual can get behind. There was something you mentioned earlier that got me thinking about these stories. And one of the things that one of the common threads, and this is a common thread in journalism, but is a common thread certainly in all of the excellent stories that are recipients of the 2025 prize, is the reporters get to what it sounds like. And what it sounds like is using the words of the folks that they're reporting on. In a way, they're reporting what the people are saying, what the people are doing. They're reporting in a sense with more than on abstract. They're giving a voice literally in quotation marks to these folks. And I thought particularly there's a New York Times story at Bible Study for the Homeless, A Search for Meaning, which I thought was a fantastic story because the story that I have heard from local shelters here in Grand Rapids is we get together on a regular basis with folks in the community who serve homeless populations in Grand Rapids and just sort of keep abreast as what they're doing, what their needs are doing, what sort of new programs they're trying to get off the ground. And one of the things that I almost always hear when in the pitch from people at the beginning of what they're doing is the religious organizations. They say, you know what, we know that in the bad old days, we used to force people to pray or force people to listen to a message before food. And we just want to let you know we don't do that. And which is really interesting because these are Christian people. They do provide Bible study opportunities. They pray with the folks they're ministering to, but they're very, very self-conscious about leading with the religion today. Even among and these are believing people that are animated to do what they do by the love of God and the love of neighbor. And this story is great because it sort of flips that, and it gives voice to homeless people and what they're finding in the Bible and how that's transforming their lives. And I thought that was just an amazing selection and a story that I had overlooked this past year. I subscribed to the New York Times. I read the New York Times, and I somehow missed this the first time around, and it's a really wonderful story.
Yeah, that's a good summary, and I hope listeners will actually go to the Zenger House website, www.zengerhouse, Z-E-N, not a zinger,
yep,
but a Zenger, Zengerhouse, www.zengerhouse.com, and can read the story. This is about the Lamb Center in Fairfax, Virginia. And yeah, they offer at the center, they offer free breakfast and lunch, showers, laundry, all, the various material needs. But, and this is what Jason Duperl writes, I'm quoting here, the center treats Bible study as equally vital, if not more so, end quote. Mm-hmm. And the story explains that. And there are a couple of interesting things about that. Number one, as you say, that it used to be that Christian homeless shelters would emphasize all this, but some of them actually de-emphasize it right now. But that's not truthful. It's not truthful in what the Bible says. The spiritual food is as important, mm-hmm. perhaps even more important in some ways than the material food. I mean, the material food is obviously important. If a person is starving, that person needs food. But then what? the spiritual food is absolutely vital. And if a Christian organization doesn't do it, doesn't urge people to do it, I mean, there can be a big debate about whether uh, pushing people into doing it, requiring people to do it in order to get a dinner, whether that's acceptable and whether that's useful. In China, they used to call people just made a profession of faith. Uh, in return for a bowl of rice, they would talk about rice Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So actually asking people to make professions if in order to get fed is not helpful. Requiring the people sit through a service, I think, is generally helpful, but it depends. I've gone to years ago. I went to chapel services at the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, which had really the most uproarious, excited hymn singing I ever heard. People would actually go up like in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," be dancing in the aisles while singing hymns, and all that was great. Except most of the people there were drunk,
Oh boy.
and that's why they were doing it. So you don't know how useful that was. Nevertheless, yeah, I think there should be very definitely a spiritual component and a material component. And the interesting thing, and Jason DeParle, to his credit and for the value of readers, quotes a study on this, that the people who get involved spiritually, go to services and so forth, there are also material benefits in the sense that they get their life in order. They are less likely to be using illegal drugs or alcohol. They are less likely to be really knocked down by mental illness and completely out of it. I mean, it helps in so many ways. So there's a physical benefit to spiritual change, but the most important thing to do it is basically the question of, well, who are we worshiping? Who is God? And if a Christian organization just becomes like a secular organization and disregards all that, it's really not doing a good job. I've been involved in the debate about whether required participation in chapel services is a better thing or not. I stayed for a few days. I've stayed for a few days. I mean, living in homeless shelters in the past couple of years to understand more about what goes on and write about this. One of my favorites is in Colorado Springs, the Springs Rescue Mission, that doesn't require any participation, but urges it by saying, hey, you want to be involved in our program. Whether or not you get involved in our program, you will get fed and you'll have a bed to sleep in. But if you get involved in our program, you can actually have the same bed every night. You are regular and you can do this and this and this. So there are some small material benefits to urge people on to taking advantage of the opportunities they have for spiritual development. That seems to me a good way to go. You're not forcing a person, but you're also not ignoring it. You are urging, as we should urge, as if we're Christians, we should urge people to take advantages of what God's offering to us.
Yeah. And one of the striking things about this story is it gives you slices of active conversations and debates over the Bible between folks who are being served at the shelter. They're engaging in it, but they're engaging in a lively conversational debating way, not in a, they're being browbeaten to believe a certain thing, but are truly actively engaged. And it's just beautiful to I almost said beautiful to see, but this is because the photographs accompanying this story are also amazing. Mm-hmm. And that's true of many of these winners. What role does photography play in telling a story like these? One of the striking things, and I think about this a lot, is some of the most strikingly beautiful photos you can see on the internet are in the websites of newspapers. And I think that's something that we don't think, we tend to think about this as a textual medium, and it is, but pictures have long played a role in this, and they really help bring this story to life.
Absolutely. One of the adages of good writing, or more broadly, good journalism is show, don't tell. And good descriptive writing shows, but photographs also. Very, very much so. So, yeah, there's basically a role for good journalism of photographers and writers. One of the things that's happened on local newspapers is that along with a lot of writers being fired, a lot of photographers have been fired.
Yeah.
And used to be and I remember this on the Boston Globe, or even on a little newspaper I worked on in Bend, Oregon, the Bulletin. There was a staff photographer, and and he was actually very good, and the role he played in presenting stuff was really important. So, yeah, showing, not telling. Um, Emily Dickinson in the 19th century, in her poetry, she used the expression "tell it slant," which meant rather than forcing someone down a person's throat, put the information in front of a person, put the poetic images in front of a person. But here with photography, put the pictures in front of people, and then let people make up their own minds. Now, it's not anarchic. A photographer has to choose the camera angles, chooses speed of the film, all these types of things, chooses what to shoot at. So he's presenting a certain picture, but he's still letting readers see and then analyze and decide. And telling it slant, I think, is a really important thing to do in good writing. Show, don't tell.
One of the things, and I guess this goes back to a sort of larger industry question, because when you look at this, we mentioned, a lot of these stories are from the New York Times or the Atlantic or the Athletic, which is owned by the New York Times, another
Right.
sports focused story. But that was a media property that was bought by the Times several years ago. There's one from Christianity Today. Is there a concentration of talent at the largest newspapers in America? And if there is that something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, that certainly has been a trend. As local newspaper jobs often have dried up, the New York Times, very successful in part by having games and
Yeah.
attracting readers that way. It's been doing quite well economically, and a lot of talent flows there. Uh, um, so what can you do about it? I can't fault journalists for wanting to be there. It's a really fine newspaper in lots of ways, although I disagree with it. It's posture on a number of issues, but it's really good. And New York City is a great place to live, especially if you're young and just walking around everywhere. Um, no, it's terrific. So I can't fault them for doing it, but it's too bad that rather than staying in one place for a long time and becoming almost a legend in that city, you go elsewhere. Um, there's a columnist who's been on the Boston Globe for 50 years, Dan Shaughnessy,
Hmm.
who's a sports columnist, and yeah, he's um, a professional, lifelong character there, and beloved or hated or applauded or scorned, but he's there in the city, and I think it's really too bad when everyone flocks to New York City. Can't blame the people,
Yeah.
but there is a structural problem here. So. Yeah, I want to see lots of local publications, and that's my bias. If there are any listeners here who see a really good article in their own local newspaper or website or things like that on the Zenger House website, www.zengerhouse.com, there's a form you can just fill in and yeah, give us this information, and our one staffer or one of our five board members will actually look at it. And yeah, I would love to have more Zenger Prizes going to local and unknown publications or little known publications.
Absolutely. One of the other trends in publishing I wanted to ask you about is one direction is you have these very talented reporters that often go to these the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, these very excellent papers. Again. But then you also have folks sort of striking out in sort of independent ways, oftentimes not even affiliated with even a small boutique publication, but completely independent, basically the sort of Substack model of publishing where someone will just be their own editorial team, be their own promotional team, and there are not a lot, but some folks who make a living, and even a few who make a good living doing that sort of thing. What do you make of that sort of trend?
Um, Two things, positive and negative. The positive thing is it's here really good writers who are mature, accomplished truth tellers can actually do that and do well. Both having the satisfaction of controlling their own material and sometimes financially doing well. I mean, I can recommend in particular two
Yeah.
Substacks. Mindy Belz, Belz, has a Substack called Globetrot. Mindy was a fantastic colleague of mine at World Magazine for 29 years. And Globetrot is a good name for her Substack because she went all over the world and very bravely and courageously went to places. So, yeah, I recommend that. And she can now do that, make a living doing it, but even more than that, just have the satisfaction of communicating with some loyal readers and getting the material out. And she knows about telling the truth, and she knows how to write. One of the really top writers at Christianity Today, which I'm now involved in editing, Bonnie Christian,
Yes.
With a K, has a Substack that I highly recommend. She writes for Christianity Today also, but she has the Substack, and she can enjoy having her voice out there. And she also is a truth teller, good writer, and tells the truth. So it works well for them, and it works well for their readers. Now, at the same time, there are lots of folks out there who either because they haven't gotten a job, don't want to get a job, can't keep a job, whatever, are having their own Substacks and their own stuff, and it's sometimes it's a form of blogging, and sometimes, and I don't mean to generalize wildly, but if you're out there doing this, you know who you are. Sometimes it's not truth telling. Sometimes it's propaganda. Sometimes it's kissing up to people who they hope to get to know or can get some money from. Sometimes it's really lousy writing, and they put out their stuff without an editor. And editors, I will say, are often useful. I can say this from the editor's point of view. I think from my point of view in writing, editors have often been useful and enormously helped me when I was back in the Boston Globe. And a crotchety old guy named John Burke was very helpful to me, and I still remember him half a century later. So editors can be useful, and for someone like Mindy or Bonnie, not having an editor works fine. They can do it. For others, they desperately need an editor. And for others, their readers desperately need an editor because they're putting out stuff that just isn't true at all, and just gets people further agitated without actually knowing what's true and what's not true. So it's a blessing, it's a curse in the hands of the of mature, thoughtful people. It's good. In other hands, it can be very destructive.
I always think, I mean, one of the blessings of working at the Acton Institute is being able, when I've got an idea, to pitch it to Anthony Sacramone at Religion and Liberty, and to have him.
Anthony's very good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Unfailingly, I've never given anything to Anthony that he has not improved through his efforts, through his diligent efforts, and a lot of public. I've written for the Dispatch. I've had excellent editorial feedback from them, from their fact checkers, this sort of thing. The folks at Law and Liberty. I think the value that editors add to writing is something that writers will tell you all day, and that editors will tell you all day, but that often that's opaque to readers because they don't. I mean, if you don't see the process, if you don't take part of that process, it's sometimes it's hard to see. It really benefits. And I also think there's something to being in a community of writers. When you write for a publication, I mean, you're always writing for somebody. You're always writing, I think, either you're writing for an imaginary constructed reader, or you're writing, for your mom, or you're writing for, you have some vision of your reader in mind. And I think it's helpful to have writer colleagues in mind as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And editors, even editors that you aren't writing for, but editors that you've learned something from, that have edited you in the past, their voices become, part of your own.
Yeah. I really enjoyed editing World for almost 3 decades because we had a professional community there. Much of the staff My wife and I had, I think, 32 interns over the years who lived with us for anywhere from 2 months to a year, and a lot of them became staff members. So they were almost family. It was a professional family, and that was beneficial, I think, for me, for them, and highly enjoyable. Uh, Now with Christianity Today, I have a new professional family which I'm really enjoying. I learn from the people there. Maybe they learn something from me. Yeah, and you don't have that if you're out on your own. With all the advantages of being a lone wolf. So yeah, it is good to have a pack. Hopefully not ravenous and just eating innocent bystanders, but still, that is enormously helpful. And just one other thought, editors. Let me as a garrulous old guy with old stories.
Yeah.
Uh, Adam Meyerson was the editor of Policy Review. He is now long retired. He was the editor of Policy Review back in 1989 and 1990 when I was developing some ideas that with the help at that point of Newt Gingrich and then George W. Bush became known as compassionate conservatism, particularly from Governor Bush. His office at his capital is a mile away from my office when I was a professor at the University of Texas. So he was enormously helpful. But Adam Meyerson really got it going because I wrote an article for Policy Review that became well read about the history of poverty fighting in America and the development of Christian compassion in poverty fighting. And this became later known as compassionate conservatism. And the article was all over the place. I had a lot of good stuff in it, but it really wasn't well organized. And Adam looked at my draft and said, you got to organize this. You got to do this in some way that people will find memorable. And so I looked over all the material and thought, okay, I can actually set this up in A, B, C, D, E, F, G form, looking at the attributes of their work. The poverty fighters back in the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, they looked for affiliation, namely families, and how people, if their family is defunct, how they can have a new family of a sort. Bonding, bonding with others, so they're not lone wolves, just homeless people roaming around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They actually have a place to be and people who care for them. And it went on that way: categorization, discernment, employment, freedom, G for God. These were the 7 attributes of what made for effective compassion, effective poverty fighting, and it was there. But Adam Meyerson saw, as an editor, the need to pull it out, get it organized, do it in some way that people could actually remember. And this A, B, C, D, E, F, G became very useful over the next decade in this whole development of compassionate conservatism and explaining what it was all about and what made for effective poverty fighting, as opposed to just throwing money at a problem and not being very useful. And that was Adam Meyerson, who demanded that I get this organized, bring out the material, make it clear. And if I just had a Substack of my own at that point, I probably would have thrown on my first draft and left it at that. So, yeah, I think back at some particular editors who were very, very helpful. Didn't always like it. Uh, Adam was always kind and would say, oh, this is great. I really like this. I really like this. And the but, of course, was the turn where he would point out the things that were wrong with it, and there were things wrong with it. So that's where you can develop with colleagues. Sometimes young writers, they show their material to a friend and the friend says, oh, you're so wonderful. This is so good. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
And that's really not being a good friend. A good friend has to be critical and helpfully, optimistically critical. And that's what good editors try to be.
Yeah. Okay. To close, I wanted to ask, if a young person listens to this podcast, goes over to the Zenger House website, reads these stories, and thinks, these are really incredible, and sees the craft, sees, the sort of, they're inspired by this. They see this sort of work. They want to do this sort of work professionally. What would you recommend with all of the problems and the sort of frayed media environment today? What sort of guidance would you give to a young person that really wanted to do that serious street level reporting, focusing on, bringing light onto issues touching a biblical ethic, trying to elevate the dignity of others, and bring their plights and concerns to a larger audience? What sort of advice would you give to a young person today looking to become that sort of journalist in this sort of world?
Yeah, great question. Well, there are two things, reporting and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And reporting, go out, see things. If you're in your 20s, travel around. Um, it may be dangerous these days, so maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. If you can figure out a safe way to do it, go hitchhiking,
Mm-hmm.
which I did when I was young, and it's not done as much these days. And again, the dangers are there. You got to be careful, but nevertheless, you learn a lot that way. You go to places, you end up at night at places you otherwise wouldn't be. So travel around. If you have vacations, don't go to the same place every year.
Mm-hmm.
Go to lots of different places, and ride around on trains, sleep on trains. Don't go as a rich person. Go as a poor person, basically, and just see things and listen to people and learn. If you want to write about homelessness, go stay in homeless shelters and listen to the people there. So it's really going out, listening, paying attention to people, sights, sounds, smells, and just doing a lot of it and reporting and learning how to pay attention to things, learn how to count.
Mm-hmm.
I am not very good at paying attention to some things, even after all these years. I'm somewhat colorblind, things like that. I'm a very good counter. If I go into an auditorium, unless I'm sleepy, I will still, if I'm paying attention, look at the number of rows, look in the seats in the rows, know how many people are there. So, for example, I got a story a couple of weeks ago that talked about churches, and they were had some expression like, "Oh, it wasn't even mostly full. It was there was a good-sized crowd there."
Yeah,
that's useless. Go count. So that's one thing. Just be a reporter, and then the other aspect of it, of course, is be a writer. Learn to write. If I had to recommend one book to read, it's a small book. It's been around for decades. I've used it teaching in classes. It's by Strunk and White, Will Strunk and E.B. White, called The Elements of Style. It's very simple, but it gives some good basics of what's involved in becoming a much better writer. So read the book, the little book, because it's not, yeah, read the little book, and find a mentor. Someone, thinking of E.B. White, who also wrote Charlotte's Web, a wonderful children's book, which has the line, it's hard to find a good friend and a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
It's even harder to find a good friend and a good editor. And sometimes the two may not go together, but find someone who will read your stuff critically and push you to do better. So you often need someone who will push you out the door if you just feel, especially on a hot day, like sitting in your air-conditioned place and sucking your thumb and sitting at your laptop. Find someone who will push you out the door, and then find an editor or a mentor who will actually read your stuff carefully. Professors don't like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Students don't like to write for the most part. Professors don't like to read. So there's a conspiracy to try to defraud parents and taxpayers, doing as little as possible of both. Anyway, find a professor who will actually read your stuff, and that's hard to do. So find a mentor or a friend of some sort who will actually read your stuff critically, and again, push you to do better. And don't sit at your computer waiting for inspiration. I mean, we can all use religious inspiration, but as far as writing inspiration, sit there. And I think Shelby Foote, who was a very good writer, a novelist, and wrote 3-volume history of the Civil War, which is very readable. I think he was the one who said, when you're at a certain point, you just have to grit it out, Grit. Just at this point, sit at your computer and work it and work it and work it. So yeah, go out the door when you'd rather sit. Sit at your computer when you'd rather go out the door.
That's great advice. Marvin, thank you so much for being with us. Again, listeners, we just scratched the surface of these amazing stories that Zenger House has given these awards to. So do go navigate over to the show notes, get over to that Zenger House page, and give these stories the hearing they deserve. Marvin, thank you so much for all your work, and thank you for being with us on Acton Line.
Well, thank you.
As always, thank you for listening. Our team loves putting this podcast together for you. It's encouraging to hear from our listeners. Feedback is incredibly important because it lets us know what topics you are interested in most. If you have comments, feedback, or ideas for a show topic or interesting guest, you can email our team at producer@acton.org. Until next week, for Acton Line, I'm Mark Townsend.